Hey, what is up guys? I'm KBHD here, and this is the iPhone 6s. Now I know it might be a little bit hard to tell the difference between the 6 and the 6s at first glance, so this video is everything you need to know that is new and different about the iPhone 6s. First of all, the design. So on the outside, the design remains nearly the same, not identical, but obviously super familiar for iPhone 6 users. For those with hawk eyes, you'll notice the iPhone 6 has all the FCC markings on the bottom and no S badge. Then the 6S came out after you were no longer required to have the FCC marking, so they got rid of them, and it looks a little bit cleaner, though the S badge, I guess, looks a little bit out of place. Anyway, the main way you'll actually be able to tell if someone has the new iPhone is if they have the new pink color.
You mean rose gold, right?
It's pink, so.
Dude, it's rose gold.
It's like a pale, faded version.
Seriously, it's rose gold.
All right. It's rose gold. Anyway, the real difference on the outside is that Apple's now using a 7000 series aluminum, which makes for a stronger body, which means it won't bend as easily. It's even reinforced internally around the volume buttons where it bent last year. You can't see that, but it's there. Overall though, button placement, headphone jack, mute switch, etc., all the stuff is in the same place. It's still also the rounded shape of last year, and I've said this before, the rounded sides make it a bit slippery in the hands, so you already know what to do. Although, something to note, this new iPhone is thicker, taller, and wider than the iPhone 6. So your cases and skins from last year probably won't fit, depending on how precise they are. One of my favorite changes, though, on the front of the new iPhone is the new Touch ID. This new fingerprint sensor is ridiculously fast. Some might even say too fast. It's fast to the point where if you wake up your phone and unlock it with your finger on the home button, you might actually miss the notifications that you could have read on your lock screen, which is pretty funny because you can basically unlock Touch ID with just a tap now and not holding the home button. You can just touch it and it'll read your fingerprint that fast. The workaround, of course, to not being able to read your notifications or just check the time would be to use a different finger to check that or resort back to that trusty sleep-wake button. So the next big upgrade with the iPhone 6s is on the inside, the specs. So when the 3GS first came out, Apple said the S stood for speed. Technically, they haven't said anything since then, so I'm just gonna assume the S again stands for speed because this phone is insanely fast. It's rocking Apple's new A9 chip, technically a dual-core chip, but two very powerful cores, near 2 gigahertz, and 2 gigabytes of RAM, which is plenty for iOS, as we know. So multitasking is great. It keeps more apps in memory now longer than they did before. And overall, day-to-day performance is super snappy. Frame rates are consistently high. I've been using this phone for weeks, so it's not just a brand new phone being fast. Apps open and close really quickly, and performance throughout is top-notch. The 6S drops some insane scores too in Geekbench, on par with some laptops. So if that gives you any idea, this phone is blazing. Now there is one spec that's actually technically worse than it was before, and that's the battery. On paper, you actually have technically a slightly smaller battery in these new iPhones than you did in the previous. So the iPhone 6s is down to 1715 milliamp hours, and the iPhone 6s Plus down to 2750. The battery life, however, is still about the same, meaning the iPhone 6s battery is okay. It'll probably last you a full day normally, but heavy days you might find yourself needing to plug in before the end of the day. But the iPhone 6s Plus battery is really good. That's one of the benefits of a bigger phone. The 6s Plus has one of the best battery lives in any smartphone. It has awesome standby time, meaning you can forget to charge it at night and not have any worries. And I've failed to kill it in a day, so I'm more than happy at the end of the day ending with 20 to 30% battery life, even after normal or heavy use. Now the next main thing that's changed in the iPhone 6s is the display. Now the panel itself is still the same. It'll still look the same, a 1334 by 750 IPS panel on the iPhone 6s and the 1080p LCD on the 6s Plus. But the display now has some extra hardware to make it pressure sensitive. Apple calls it 3D Touch, and it's basically the iPhone's biggest new feature. Now it's called 3D Touch, not Force Touch, because it has multiple layers of pressure sensitivity, and that's what allows for what Apple calls peak and pop. Nobody actually calls it that, but that's what Apple's naming it. So in an app that supports 3D Touch, if you see something you like, you can press into it with a bit of pressure to peek to see what it is. And if you like what you see, you can press even harder to pop into that thing to view it full screen. And that's the essence of peek and pop. It's not just a long press, so you can actually peek into something and then decide that's all you want to see, and then you can release it to minimize it back. You can also 3D touch on the home screen, so apps that support it will reveal quick shortcuts to functions inside them when you press with some pressure. And a couple of Apple apps support this to start, a few third-party ones are doing this too, and with a little practice you can kind of get to remembering where certain functions are in the shortcut. So you can actually get it to do what you want to do a little bit quicker. It works pretty well now, but we have to remember this is still pretty early for the new iPhones, and a lot of the apps that we use today aren't supported by 3D touch. Developers, however, are getting on that, and when developers build in 3D touch functionality in a meaningful way into their apps, it'll start to build out and it'll be a lot more prevalent throughout the whole OS. So again, right now, when it's early, it seems a little bit excessive, like gimmicky, but it'll become very important in the future. When an app isn't supported and you try to 3D touch the icon on the home screen, for example, the new haptic engine gives you this quick triple buzz and it blurs the edges, letting you know there's nothing to see here. So you kind of figure out which apps have 3D touch functionality and which don't in a matter of just going around and pressing all the apps on your home screen until you find the good ones. Overall, I think 3D touch is pretty cool, but again, it will only get cooler in time thanks to developers. So the last but not least new thing on the iPhone 6s is the camera. The phone is rocking a new 12 megapixel sensor, same flash and mostly the same optics and everything, just a new sensor with the new specs to back it up. I have taken a lot of photos with my iPhone 6s Plus, partly because, I'm testing it and it's a new camera, but also because iPhones consistently encourage taking photos. The camera interface has been some of the best balances of control and ease of use in any smartphone in my opinion, so I love the app, and it's super fast and responsive and easy to take a great photo. So iPhone 6s Plus also benefits from having optical image stabilization, so low light photos are a little bit cleaner and video looks a lot smoother. So here are the photos, and honestly you're not gonna notice a whole ton of difference in detail getting 12 megapixels versus 8, but most of the improvements you're gonna notice I actually see in the colors and the image processing. Not a whole lot of sharpening going on, but there's still plenty of detail throughout the frames, and you'll probably notice colors are kind of warm throughout every scene. And that's actually pretty natural and a good representation of the actual subject, as opposed to sort of cooling off the colors, which might look a little better at first, but is less accurate. It handles exposure great, and dynamic range is pretty good since HDR is never really too aggressive since it's auto HDR. And same thing in low light. You start to see a little bit of noise as you would expect, but overall nothing too crazy here. And again, this is pretty much all just walk up to the subject, point and shoot. Now jumping from 8 megapixels to 12 now means the iPhone finally has enough pixels to shoot that 4K video I love so much. And the video from the sensor is beautiful as expected. Now if you're serious about shooting a lot of video on the iPhone, you pretty much have to go 6s Plus to get that optical image stabilization. But yeah, more of the same characteristics show up here. Detail without being overly sharp, and great exposure and dynamic range while not blowing things out, and accurate colors with warm tones all the way through. There's also a new feature in the camera this year called live photos, and I've tried really hard to give this a chance and see if it's not a gimmick, but it kinda is. Basically, live photos, which are enabled by default, captures 1.5 seconds before and 1.5 seconds after you press the shutter button for every picture. And you can even see the live indicator while you're capturing after you hit the shutter button. So you can sort of view that short GIF with sound by 3D touching the photo you just took and seeing the lead up to the shot and then what happened right after. It can be cool every once in a while, like being able to see something blowing in the wind or capturing the lead up to a photo or what happened right after you click the shutter. I don't know, my live photos would probably be a little more interesting if I was taking pictures of more dynamic things like people, but instead most of mine are just picking the camera up and then putting the camera back down, usually back into my pocket. So there's an update coming to prevent this from happening by having the iPhone read the accelerometer and gyroscope to know when you stop holding your phone up. But yeah, that's pretty much it for live photos. There's no way to share them, you just share the normal picture, and all you have to do with them is set them as your wallpaper or make them your Apple Watch face. Basically, I've come to the conclusion that live photos are just a really big, beautiful demo for 3D touch. And that's fine, it's enabled by default. They take up the space of 2 photos instead of 1, so not a big deal with storage. And the only way to view them is with a 3D touch, so learn it. 3D touch is going to be important really soon. But that's it. That's everything that's new with the new iPhone 6s. It's running iOS 9, and if you're already using a previous iPhone, you're probably already very familiar with iOS 9, so I don't need to tell you about the slightly new font or the slightly worse multitasking carousel, in my opinion. You're already familiar with the experience. If you're not coming from an iPhone, you might be interested in the 6s for its blazing fast performance and ease of use and awesome camera. My biggest problem with it is 16 gigabytes? Really? With 4K video and live photos and everything like that? Honestly, it's 2015. We're pretty much done with that. 16 gig phones need to die. And it's not just Apple, everyone stop it. Anyway, that's been it. I guess let the hype train begin for the iPhone 7. Thank you for watching this review video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to hit that like button down below. And if you have any comments or questions, I'll be hanging out in the comment section below and we can chat there as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.